Hi, this is Osiris, Munir with Ankh Entertainment and the Cover City News, here today to talk to Mr. Tom Jimmerson of now a gallery called Assembly TOMWORK, located at 2045 South La Cienega Boulevard, Los Angeles, California, 90034. We are just going around and talking to different galleries, and everyone has such a unique story. And so we want to start off by saying hi, Tom, and thank you for letting us into your wonderful studio here on La Cienega.
Happy to.
And one of the questions we have is just what type of art is your specialty, and what is your history with your gallery?
I specialize in failure, which I think for very not inconsequential reasons, because I think that the success stories are oftentimes the least interesting stories within the whole trajectory of capitalism, and failure stories are by definition, kind of almost always more intriguing as to how this came about. What was the nature of the motivation behind the effort? In this case, this is kind of a vast failure of 100 pieces made over, decades. And I mean, I don't want to declare it a failure because it's on the market and it can sell, and I only want a success for the artists that I deal with. But the rhetoric of success, as it is typically handed to us in the art world, I find to be a relatively boring story. And so, as a consequence, like first of all, I'm A-okay with Gagosian or the major galleries. I don't have a grudge against them, but I find that so familiar, that story, that I feel compelled to try to tell it differently. And as a consequence, I do things like this.
And that is very eloquently said. What caused you to, some of the galleries have art, sculpturing, photography and things like that. Your specialty seems to be in, I can see lettering, there's a lot of text. They are newspaper articles that seem to be very, very authentic in their presentation. And what caused you to have this sort of art, and what is this called? What are you calling this? I know it's Assembly TOMWORK.
I'd call it something, well, it's technically collage, but I would probably more generically refer to my interests as realism. But not realism of the kind of, though I like hyper-realist painting, not of that sort, but realism as a escape from abstraction, and an interest in things the way they are, narratively. And it doesn't necessarily take the form of a realistic sculpture or realistic painting. These certainly are not realist by the standards of art history. But I would say, just in the most broad and philosophically generic sense, my interest is realism. Okay,
and realism involving information, realism involving images, or combination of both?
All of that, the nature of society, the where we are now. The mechanisms of the art world, that seems like something a little kind of arcane, but I think it's not. I don't feel it is. I think the mechanisms of the art world are like just fascinating, and well worth study. And so all of those things I want to treat with to give a reality effect to those subjects. So consequently, the next show will be something like this. This is from 1962.
I love that. That's very interesting.
But then the show after that won't, this doesn't physically resemble that, and the show that will follow this will not physically resemble. And yet I think thematically, I'd argue that they have continuity.
Similar, yeah, they do have a similar thread, because actually they both are involving information. One is textual information, where it's written and you can read it, and that is still information, except it's a communicative part of information, but it's still, in order to use that phone, one would have to pick up the phone and then talk to someone, which is a communication. What I want to know is, where did your gallery come from? Did you start here in LA or Culver City? Or
yes.
What happened? How did you?
I'm 60 years old, and I began 7 years ago, so I came to this fairly late. I have a history of being involved with these artists. 6.5 years ago, so I've been at this 7 years.
Wow.
So I have a history of intellectual investment in this material that goes back a lot further.
Okay, like what? Take us
well,
back.
Well, going back to 1974, 75.
And you were doing what in 1974,
I was curating for exhibitions coming out of school, out of the University of California at Irvine.
So you were on a path to going to building up to this.
And then I worked for several years for art galleries, including Doug Christmas' Ace
Wow.
Gallery.
Wow.
And then took a big period away from that to study and practice architecture. And came back as of about 7 years ago.
And do you feel that what you're doing now is more stimulating to you intellectually, spiritually, emotionally? Can you see the thread and the pattern?
I would say intellectually.
Okay.
You know, there is something that critics and curators and gallerists share with artists. I don't want to make too much of the connection because I think artists do a specific thing and other people do a specific thing. But the connection is a burning desire to make a statement. And so the statement's made by aggregating material together, sometimes aggregating personalities together. You know,
That's always fun.
Like for instance, the collector Diana Zlotnick is as important to me as the artist, meaning they're different personalities that occupy positions in time. And so that my job is to make contact with them or allow them to make contact with me, and then tease out how information can be, you know, how value, in a sense, not necessarily in the financial sense, but how value in the more intellectual sense can be obtained from that, and then redistributed.
Okay, now you mentioned Diana and your other friend,
her assistant Kathy.
Her assistant Kathy. Is it possible you two could come around or you could talk about your work, because they won't be able to hear you or see you, and I don't know. And so the camera is still rolling, and so we have to keep talking.
Have I unfairly trapped you?
And maybe since Diana is going to roll around here and
poor thing. I'm sorry.
This is great stuff, because this is the real world that people need to know about. And this is what we take pride in telling local stories about people that people can really relate to.
Diana's lot.
So Diane, I need you to move over somewhat near Tom. Oh, and look at the beautiful colors you're wearing. Keep your head up so I can see your face.
You're a good
Tilt
sport.
your hat a little
You're
bit.
a good sport.
So can you introduce yourself, or have Tom introduce you and tell us
Diana
who you are?
Zlotnick is a collector who, boy, I'm going to say the early 60s, but it could be even earlier than that, has been a very important collector in Southern California, a journalist as well, publishing a well-known newsletter, most prominently in the decade of the 70s.
And what was that newsletter called, for those of us?
Newsletter on the Arts.
Newsletter, and that was done here in LA, or where were you doing it? It was? Through what paper? Or is this your own paper?
My own paper.
It was self-published,
wow.
But it was ubiquitous. We all knew about it.
Oh yeah.
And like I say, it still has a presence, but it was probably most well known in the decade of the 70s, 80s.
Before there was a lot of literature that was going on about Southern California.
And pre-internet, I mean, this is just a piece of paper. Not to say that it isn't also online, but it's a piece of paper that you would hold in your hand
And you could read.
And thumb through. And
so how did you two meet? What caused your paths?
She came into my gallery almost at the beginning, and because we shared an interest in some of the same artists.
Oh, wow.
Like me, Diana has an interest both in artists of great fame and success, but also artists who have not, who are extraordinarily talented and very, very important, but whose work has not been as well received. And she deals with them, I'm speaking for her for a second right now, in a very unprejudicial,
She said, I don't mind.
in a very unprejudicial fashion. The famous and expensive artists are not necessarily better than the artists who aren't.
Now that's good to hear people say.
And she and I have that's where we intersect. We have an interest in that, in a certain territory. Because much of her collection is fabulously, important by any historical standard. There are pieces of it that are equally good that are probably not necessarily going to be recognized as such without some additional effort.
Now, Diana, are you yourself an artist, a painter? Did you come from some creative source and you got more into the actual business aspect of it, or did you just
it was all intuitive.
Oh wow! Can you speak a little more about intuition and how that works in your world?
Well, it's taken me a lot of years to realize what I can do. That I can very often see a work, realize that work is a new world to me, and it cancels out the world around me, and I just focus on that work and it talks to me.
Oh wow. And when it speaks to you, how do you get it? Do you get it through dreams, visions? Does it come out through your hands? Or?
Vision.
Okay, and those visions come about while you're walking around, or
no,
you just look at
seeing the work.
Okay, wow. And when it happens, does it take on a whole character of itself and then you write about it, or you talk to someone about it?